Hello and welcome to the Evercore ISI 2020 Fireside Chat with Kimberlite Research's David Batt. Speaking today from Evercore ISI will be energy analyst James West. I'd like to remind everyone that the material in this webinar is based upon information considered to be reliable, but neither Evercore ISI nor its affiliates guarantee its completeness or accuracy. Assumptions, opinion, and recommendations contained herein are subject to change without notice. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future performance. This material is not intended as an offer or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security, and we will not be disclosing any non-public information. Our speaker will be taking questions via the questions window on your webinar control panel. Please type your questions in at any time during the presentation. And now I'll turn the microphone over to James West.
Thanks, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Before I introduce David, I'd just encourage any of you that may have dialed in via the phone, if you're able to hop on your computer and hit the link. We're going to use a lot of slides in today's presentation, so that would be a better way to view the slides and to see some of the excellent information that David's going to share with us today. So again, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar with David Batt of Kimberlite Research. This is the next in our Virtual Energy Industry Leaders series, so thanks for joining us. Before speaking with David a few weeks ago, I had heard of him and knew of Kimberlite. I didn't know how well known, quite frankly, he was in the industry. And since announcing this webinar, we've had just a ton of inbounds from CEOs, CTOs, CIOs, of industry participants that have talked about how great his information is and how they use it, especially when thinking about technology, performance, and certainly M&A. So Kimberlite International Oilfield Research is an international oil and gas market research and consulting company that uses data collected from one-on-one interviews with professionals to assess current market trends and establish performance benchmarks for oilfield equipment and service suppliers. The company serves as a third party to collect and evaluate feedback from industry professionals. This offers an unbiased review of the services and technologies E&P companies use in their daily operations. Kimberlite provides anonymity to all participants, allowing them to provide candid feedback on issues most important to them. The company produces reports and analysis on market shares, supplier performance, regional reports and product line reports, and other specialty services that are used by oil and gas companies, oilfield service providers, and of course, investment bankers. David brings over 30 years of extensive energy and oil and gas experience. He began his career as a geologist with Chevron and later held executive and general management roles with Chevron Corporation, where he led the creation of Chevron Energy Solutions and served as vice president. In 2003, he departed Chevron to lead Constellation New Energy Texas, and under David's leadership, Constellation became the second largest provider in the emerging Texas deregulated energy market. He returned to his upstream roots in 2007 and has been involved in leading oilfield research, tracking all facets of the upstream industry, including technologies and supplier performance. He received his BS in geology from the University of Oklahoma, an MS in geology from Oklahoma State University, and an MBA from the University of New Orleans. So David, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, James. I'm glad to be here with you today and share some of the market insights and data that we track and see, and address questions and kind of take you through some of the data that we track. And so let me know if you can't see my screen or if you lose audio contact, since I know we're all remotely connected here. But James, you're right. Each year at Kimberlite Research, we spend about 20,000 hours each year qualifying and scheduling interviews with key customers from around the world to collect voice of customer feedback. And the research and findings that I'll be sharing with you today are based on voice of customer feedback from over 9,600 interviews globally. And the data can be filtered, as you said, geographically by U.S. land, international land, or offshore, or even by company type, major oil companies versus national oil companies. But our research spans many of the major oil field products and services used across the industry, both drilling, completion, production, subsea, geology, and geophysics, formation evaluation. And this provides a comprehensive overview of the market, where we're able to connect a lot of dots between what the drilling engineers are telling us versus the completion engineers versus the production engineers. And this helps us connect a lot of dots, particularly as it relates to topics like the adoption of digital and such, that we can get kind of the cross-discipline approach as to how digital adoption is taking place. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. Now, the data set that I'll be sharing today is fairly rich and multidimensional, and in this exhibit, we cross-plot supplier performance on the x-axis versus pricing competitiveness on the y-axis. But before diving into the data, I just want to make sure everyone understands this quadrant map. We call it the value map at Kimberlite because this is a visual picture depicting the competitive positioning of the suppliers that we'll be using on many of our exhibits here. But the top right-hand quadrant is the premium offering quadrant, where suppliers are viewed as performing better than industry average on the x-axis. They're moved over to the right, and they're also viewed as having pricing that's a little bit higher than industry norms, so they cost more but worth it. And the bottom right-hand quadrant is the value advantage quadrant, where suppliers are viewed as performing better than competitors and positioned to gain market share or improve pricing. The bottom left-hand quadrant is the discount offering quadrant, where suppliers are performing below industry average but offset their performance shortcomings with attractive pricing, so that effectively the oil and gas operators get what they pay for. You can see that the fair value fairway runs from the northeast quadrant diagonally down to the southwest quadrant. Any oilfield service companies that can maintain competitive positioning in this fair value band should be able to defend their market positions. And obviously, as an oilfield service company, you wish to avoid this top left-hand quadrant. And I suppose if you're an oil company, you would prefer not to be hiring service companies in this top left-hand quadrant, because here you're competitively disadvantaged. So diving into the data here, taking a look at, say, Schlumberger on a global basis here, you can clearly see that Schlumberger is positioned regionally as performing better than industry average internationally, and really competitively positioned as that premium-based supplier, cost more but worth it, living up to their market image. However, when you look at Schlumberger in U.S. land and the North America market, you can see that their pricing strategies are not in alignment with their performance profiles, and this creates a challenge for Schlumberger to be able to grow market share and defend the pricing premiums and strategies they'd like to implement here. One thing, if you take a look at Schlumberger, though, by individual product line, and these are many of the PSLs that we track, not all, but you can see one of the things about Schlumberger is the high density, how the proximity of all these product lines, of how consistent they are in performance on the x-axis. There's a high degree of consistency to where Schlumberger certainly lives up in many cases to cost more but worth it. In other areas, they cost more, and in some areas, they need to improve performance. But when you break it down more regionally here, and you look at the offshore market on the far right-hand quadrant of the map, or international land in the center of this PowerPoint slide, one of the greatest value propositions for Schlumberger statistically is if you just look at the consistency of their performance on a probabilistic basis, they're going to deliver the most consistent outcome across their various portfolio of offerings in the offshore international market of probably any major oilfield service company out there. In North America, though, you can see how challenged Schlumberger is in terms of consistency of performance. And certainly we see correlations between their financials of the companies and how they perform in the field and how they're competitively positioned in the field. Now keep in mind, whatever slides that I showed today, regardless if they're positive or not positive to a particular supplier, we're an independent researcher, James, so it's we're just reporting the news here. But
sure, fair enough. Don't worry.
Okay, but in fairness to Baker Hughes, you can see they have some really strong competitive strengths in rotary steerables and sand control and some really good value, but in some areas they're just not performing at a level that's up to industry par, and they certainly don't demonstrate the level of consistency that you saw with the Schlumberger dot plot. But in defense of Baker Hughes, if you look at them in the offshore market, they have a very strong consistency of performance and a very high degree of value, oftentimes undervaluing themselves both offshore and internationally to compete against Schlumberger, who's the premium provider. In Baker Hughes, too, they demonstrate some competitive vulnerabilities in North America land as well, where they try to lead with pricing discipline, but the performance profile is simply not there to support it. By region, you can see Baker Hughes tends to most often undervalue themselves, Gulf of Mexico, and many of the international markets that we talked about. If you look at Halliburton, you can see that their consistency of their dot plot's a little bit tighter than Baker Hughes, so that's good for them. And certainly Halliburton exhibits a lot of material strengths in performance and competitive positioning as it relates to ESPs and Baroid and cementing and pumping services. We'll talk a little bit about their hydraulic fracturing services here in a moment. They too tend to undervalue themselves in the Gulf of Mexico and internationally to compete against Schlumberger, but in many cases the international performance is viewed as being on par or slightly below industry average performance. So using low pricing as a mechanism to compete against Schlumberger, who's typically performing at or better than industry average, is usually a necessity for Halliburton to compete internationally. When you look at Halliburton in the North America market, which is a really strong market for Halliburton, you can see they certainly try to lead with pricing discipline as elevated on the y-axis. In many cases, though, their performance profile is just not in full alignment. But Halliburton's been doing an excellent job of driving efficiencies and cost out of their system to improve their competitive positioning, and I would expect that this competitive position to continue to improve for Halliburton. Offshore and international, they position themselves as value-based alternatives. When you take a look at the overall performance trends in the international land market in the center part of the graph and the offshore market on the right-hand side of the graph, and you look at overall performance for 16, 17, 18, and 19, based on the voice of the customer feedback that we receive, you can consistently see that Schlumberger has a differentiated performance profile versus the big three. However, when you move to the North America land market, you can instantly see that many of these smaller mid-tier suppliers that we aggregate together as all others, in our database globally, we probably have feedback on well over 1,000 different oilfield service companies that are out there. But you can see in North America land that these mid-tier, smaller independent-based suppliers outperform the industry average, which is the dash line. I'm going to if we jump ahead, like you said, into like a Permian Basin, you can see how difficult it is for an oil company to shop for services, because as you move around from basin to basin or region to region, there are certain product lines where certain oilfield service companies deliver exceptional value, and other areas where they maybe struggle a little bit. And it's by all operators. Here's Halliburton in the Permian Basin with some strong profiles in many areas, and hydraulic fracturing, they look really solid. In other areas like wireline perforating, they're competitively disadvantaged. Their iCruise rotary steerable system is still working out some kinks. Here's Schlumberger in the Permian Basin. Again, very challenging opportunity for Schlumberger in U.S. land market. If you look at all others, all these mid-tier suppliers in the Permian Basin, you can see why they're growing market share typically year on year, because when the oil and gas operators do their proper due diligence in selecting the supplier, oftentimes they gravitate to these smaller suppliers that are viewed as delivering a better overall value. Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, same thing. You can see different things that if you're an oil and gas operator in the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, you may want to choose Baker Hughes for some services, Halliburton for others, and Schlumberger for others. And so I think may pause here, James, and take questions, or if you'd like me to dive in real quick for a couple of minutes into hydraulic fracturing, I'd be glad to do that too.
Maybe I'll throw a few questions out there before we get into the fracking business. What are your E&P clients asking for today, given the the exceptional downturn that we find ourselves in that we weren't in 4 months ago?
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, as we sit here and have this conversation today, the E&P operators are reluctant to spend money and looking for every possible opportunity to delay cost. Right. But within that, as they start to look forward, given this current market climate, they realize that they need to start thinking about their sourcing strategies and how they're going to be served in a new environment on the other side of this, where the oilfield service companies will have, implemented significant reductions in staffing and support levels. And in many cases, a lot of that expertise kind of walks out the door, right? And moves towards retirement. But, we work with a host of oil companies, and one of the biggest challenges that they experience is it's very difficult for an oil company to evaluate the performance of a service company to use if they've never used them. And so take downhole mud motors in the Permian Basin. There's 40, 50 different suppliers you could perhaps go rent a mud motor from. And if you consolidated all your business to 2 or 3 mud motor suppliers and you're going to go out to bid and tender, you're going to open it up to half a dozen or a dozen suppliers. It's really difficult for an oil company to evaluate a service company on the x-axis, this performance axis. They can evaluate them on the y-axis through the bid and tendering process. And so the oil companies really struggle with breaking out between best price versus best value. And so that's a lot of the struggles that we see from the E&P operators right now is how they're going to focus on getting best value versus best price and their ability to benchmark suppliers' performance that they oftentimes don't use. The other cliche we hear about is better, faster, cheaper, right? And sure. Oftentimes we laugh about that, but if you take a look at the drilling and the completion efficiencies that have been achieved in, say, U.S. land since the last downturn, 16, 17, 18, and 19, we drill and complete the wells faster, and each year we keep going, how can this continue? But those improvements in the industry just continue to work their way through the system and keeps driving where we are today.
And so what have you seen? So as they come to you for this information and they're looking at trying to spend as little as they can, are they picking their suppliers based on where the price is the lowest, or are they trying to find some middle ground where performance is okay, or in the mid tier but pricing's low? I mean, what do you see as the criteria that are really kind of getting towards right now?
It's a good question, and quite frankly, it kind of varies from operator to operator. And even within an operator, if we're working with someone that's on drilling versus completions versus G&G, a lot of the G&G folks at oil companies are interested in technology adoption and technical prowess of suppliers as it relates to software or data processing capabilities. Others are more of really price driven. And so we see quite a bit of variability. I think moving forward, though, I think given, we're reaching higher and higher levels of efficiency. Like you take hydraulic fracturing crews, for example, as we cut back, what are we down to, 80 fracturing spreads out there now, roughly, James?
Somewhere around, yeah, maybe even lower at this point.
And we started out the year at what, 300 and some?
Yep, 300. Mm-hmm. So
what's happening is, like you take Halliburton, I think they announced that all of their frac pumps are their high efficiency Q10 pumps, right? The crews that are being kept and maintained are the best crews. And so, the efficiency levels of what's being kept right now is at a very high level. But moving forward, when we get to the other side of this and we have to start to rehire and whatnot, no accidents, no missteps, equipment reliability, going back to this manufacturing mindset of operational efficiency, I think is going to be really a key factor. We noticed in the most recent hydraulic fracturing report for U.S. land last year in 2019 that the operators were placing increasing levels of emphasis on completion efficiency. Who can operate with the fewest missteps in the field.
Right. Understood. Well, maybe that's a good segue into the hydraulic fracturing excerpts you were going to show.
Well, sure. Naturally, Halliburton's a huge leader in hydraulic fracturing. And when you look at their competitive positioning in the 2019 report, you can see how they're somewhat in a vulnerable position where they're trying to maintain pricing discipline here, obviously. But their performance profile is such that many of these mid-tier suppliers like Liberty, ProPetro, ProFrac, and others are really distinguishing themselves as really a competing value in the marketplace. But in Halliburton's defense, if you look at Halliburton by basin here on the right-hand side of this graph, you can see if there's one basin you want to get it right, it's the Permian Basin, and they've done that, right?
Sure.
And, the Marcellus is a pretty good basin too, because it provides a good baseline for our gas production. And so usually there's a good baseline of rigs operating through and through in the Marcellus to maintain gas levels at proper levels. But you can see they do struggle with some of the performance to the voice of the customer data. I think what's interesting over here on the left-hand side is to see the pricing strategy from Halliburton from 17 to 18. how Halliburton fought aggressively to maintain market share in 18, but in 2019, just like Jeff Miller communicated to the street, he said, "Look, we're going to maintain some pricing discipline here, right?"
Yeah.
And you see what happened on the Y pricing axis. If I go interactive just for a quick second with you on our
Sure.
software, and I take you to the pricing competitiveness line, the dash line, you can see those pricing competitiveness ratings were getting better and better through the eyes of the E&P operator saying, "I like what I see." But
Right.
if you look at Halliburton's pricing competitiveness ratings from 18 to 19, they diverged with the market. And so while there were suppliers being overly accommodative on pricing like BJ Services or C&J, which is now part of Next Tier, and
Sure.
Calford, Halliburton says, "I'm not going to play that game. I'm going to maintain some pricing discipline."
And their
And what's
returns went up as a result.
exactly. And so that's an excellent correlation where we see voice of customer data correlating to financial performance. Um, And so Halliburton's a big player, and I would imagine now that everything's Q10, that their efficiency levels will continue to be very high. But if you take a look at the operators that are drilling more than 100 wells per year, or drilling and completing more than 100 wells per year, the wellbore manufacturers, if you will,
Right.
you can see Halliburton's exceptionally positioned there, as well as Liberty. Now, Liberty's a real standout because in 2016, Liberty was principally Rockies focused. And I have to really tip my hat to them because as they expanded beyond the Rockies and into the Permian and the Eagle Ford and some other areas, you can see what they did from 16 to 17. They had to get a little aggressive on price to work their way in to the market, but you can see how they've marched their way back into this
Right.
premium zone. And I
That's
think
impressive.
it really is. I mean, one of the biggest misnomers in the oil field is, and I hear this a lot from oil field service companies, is I've got to have the lowest price to win. And, Liberty is one of these companies that has been able to demonstrate that, look, if you can provide differentiated value and service quality and outcomes, you don't necessarily have to be the lowest price to win, and you can implement some pricing discipline, just like Halliburton provides pricing leadership and discipline in their areas of strength, be it ESP pumps with Summit acquisition or hydraulic fracturing. And so, you really have to tip your hat to a company like Liberty that's been able to expand geographically and not stub their toe operationally.
No doubt.
Let me see here. There's Schlumberger, but they'll be updating their U.S. strategy. Their performance from basin to basin as they were integrating a bunch of different assets together over the last few years has not been an easy task.
Sure.
FTS continues to position themselves more of a discount provider. And then here's Next Tier as they coming together as C&J and Keene. Be interesting to see. They have a strong team over there if they can get themselves back repositioned on the right-hand side of this x-axis where I think they'd like to be. I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a couple technology questions. What are the critical technologies you're seeing emerge during the downturn, and what maybe was emerging even before the oil price collapse?
Sure. I would say the three big ones that we see right now, and quite frankly, they were there before this market downturn. They're just accelerating, and that is remote operations, cloud adoption, and digital or machine learning topics. And these are ones that we continue to see. Remote operations is a real interesting one because in remote operations for drilling services, you get to have fewer people on the rig site, which certainly helps during this current situation with travel restrictions in many cases. Improve safety and consistency. In fact, in our drilling report, let me see if I can go grab it down here somewhere. When we did our drilling report, which we update every year, we'll talk about the use of drilling advisory systems. And you can see that 43% of the operators we interviewed worldwide use these directional drilling advisory systems to help determine optimal well path and instructions to the driller on the slide, rotate sequence, inclination to point the bit, how much weight to put on the bit.
Right.
think you had Terry on yesterday, and you were talking about some of the offshore automation. You can see the vast majority of the offshore wells are using these automated type systems to help guide you, right?
Right.
Um, even drilling automation, even though we're looking 5 years out with this question on automated drilling technologies, where downhole sensors are communicating with rig equipment to automatically adjust well path and direction. We clearly see that there's an appetite for it. Now, granted, this is looking 5 years out. And when we ask them, what do you anticipate to be the biggest benefit from this? And these are open-ended questions, so they can say whatever they like. But when we bucketize their voice of customer verbatim comments, they're talking about improved efficiency and improved well placement.
Right.
Even
That
in
makes,
the sub.
sure. Go ahead. I did say that makes a lot of sense.
Even when we talk to the subsea folks, when we ask them the open-ended question, what's the next big thing in the future? Digital and data analytics was at the top of the list in the 2019 report. They had no mentions in the 2016 report. More monitoring and sensors. And since most all of the subsea wells are already equipped with downhole monitoring gauges, and many of the subsea operators are beginning to specify in their subsea trees, fiber optic feed-throughs, to where they want all these wells to be fiber optically connected for the future. So, we can clearly see that trend towards digital. I know you'd mentioned cloud as well. Do you want to touch on cloud?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Cloud's a good one. I think you said you spoke to Nagaraj recently at Landmark, and I imagine he has a lot to contribute on this topic.
I spoke to him on Friday, and I took 14 pages of notes. I still haven't transcribed them yet. So yes, Nagaraj has a lot to say about it.
Well, not to get off topic here for a moment, but we just updated the G&G software report for 2020, and Halliburton really stands out as a leader in cloud applications, and so there's certainly benefit from that. And en route to going to where I wanted to go in my slide deck, I just realized we just published the completion update for packers and sand control and permanent downhole monitoring and such. And when we asked the international operators what technologies they're going to make greater use of over the next 2 years, intelligent completions and downhole monitoring were at the top of the list on an unaided basis. Same for the offshore operators. That's machine learning. We'll come back to that. When you get to cloud, one of the biggest things that we see is the adoption of hybrid clouds continuing to grow from the 2018 report at 16% to the 2020 report at 33%, anticipated to grow to 45% by 2022. When we look at cloud, Microsoft got out to the early lead as the provider of choice, but Google and Amazon didn't want to let too much grass grow underneath their feet, and you can see that they're really starting to tighten this market up. The thing with cloud that we notice is the adoption rate of cloud is increasing, but up to this point, it's been increasing at a slower rate, James, than we thought it was going to grow. And a lot of that is due to the cost of it, because when you move to the cloud, you're really being able to displace your internal IT cost. And many oil companies aren't prepared to let go of all that legacy cost. And so that's been a big hindrance. But what we see here is, of the G&G community, 22% of them were currently accessing the cloud in some capacity, but only accessing about 10% of their applications, which means that these oil companies are beginning to move certain applications to the cloud, almost as a trial basis, right?
Right.
But when we ask them what the benefits are of cloud, what we find is, particularly in this current environment, being able to have remote access, being able to enhance collaboration with team members, particularly when we're all remotely situated in different locations, particularly for the international operators, being able to start up faster. And so I think the current environment that we're in is going to really accelerate remote operations and cloud adoption, and even digital improvements is kind of what we see and most of our voice of customer data that we're collecting across the disciplines, be it drilling, completion, production, subsea, or even G&G.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting. So, David, when a service company reaches out to you, what are they seeking to understand?
Well, the oil field service companies spend a lot of time and effort each year trying to get better, right?
Right.
And particularly in this current environment, James, I mean, one of the areas they need help with is, and you see this as you cover the companies, they're cutting back, their CapEx, right?
Yeah.
Trying to keep cash flows in line. They have limited dollars for research and development and new technology development. And so we help them a lot with understanding technology adoption and where the major gaps are out there in the industry, and where, based on the voice of the customer, where they'd like to see additional improvements to help get their technology roadmap aligned with their internal thinking.
Right.
The second thing the oilfield service companies use our data for is quite frankly, it's just an independent source of validation of how are they really competitively positioned in the marketplace. And so many oilfield service companies are challenged with their internal view of how they think about themselves and their performance versus their competitors doesn't necessarily line up with the customer's view of how they're performing versus their competitors, right?
Right.
What we typically find at an oilfield service company is you can tend to break up your customer base into three broad groups. You've got your customers that use an oilfield service company. They're big fans, big advocates, saying these guys are awesome, right? And usually you know who those are and you're okay there. But about 50% of your customer base think you're just okay.
Right.
And that's where they get cross-threaded the most, if you will. The oilfield service company's impression of themselves definitely does not line up with that 50% of the customer's view of how they're performing and how they're performing versus their peers. And having that dislocation or that disconnect really impedes the ability to properly allocate resources to improve performance, to improve service levels, and to better even segment customers. And so, it's basically kind of an independent self-improvement type of benchmarking that we provide, and they integrate it with their internal data.
Got it. So are you seeing from maybe the larger service companies as they, we've had some M&A, we have new a new CEO at the largest with a new game plan. We have Halliburton, totally shifting strategy back to they've always been a returns focused company, but certainly dropping the hammer on returns now. Are they using your data to look at their portfolios as well and to see, okay, or at least collaborate with you that they have a business that they see is underperforming and come to you and say, is it? What are the customers saying? Or can we raise pricing to get the returns up to make it competitive so that we can figure out if it fits with our portfolio?
Sure. The short answer is yes. The oilfield service companies, when they look at their financial returns that you evaluate them on a regular basis, they see areas where they're experiencing some success and some areas where they're experiencing challenges, right? And so, the first question is, why am I experiencing success and why am I experiencing challenges? And so the first thing that oilfield service companies will do is do a inward reflection, evaluation as to why they think that's the case. But when they look at our voice of customer data and, you start to, let me pick a slide here, not to pick on Schlumberger, but, you take a look at their competitive position in a particular market, it starts to correlate with some of the financial challenges that they're seeing financially, right?
Right.
And so the oil companies and the oilfield service companies, I should say, they tend to integrate the gift of feedback from the voice of customer data with their internal knowledge and their internal financials to understand where this is lining up and maybe where they're maybe just not going to be competitive in a particular region or a product line. And so you'll see a lot of pruning back, I think, as a result of this downturn
Yeah.
of oil field service companies saying, look, we just cannot compete in these geo markets. We just cannot compete in these particular product lines. The impact to the oil companies are going to be, a reduction of choice,
Sure.
right? Look what's happened in the marine seismic world, right? Where Western Geco exited, CGG exited. Today, if you need to go shoot marine seismic, you really have PGS, Shearwater, and the Chinese firms for the most part.
Yeah. It never
So
got pricing. They never got returns.
right. But like you take today, I mean, what was it I was looking at? I think I may have shared with you where we have 60 different mud motor suppliers out there
Right.
today globally. I mean, do we really need 60 different mud motor suppliers to support what we're going to look like on the other side of this downturn?
I can tell you
Right.
the answer is no.
Okay.
But I do think that's interesting, the point you brought up on Schlumberger with their on North America and where they rank with the customer views on pricing and quality, because Olivier has clearly made the decision to totally restructure North America. So he, whether he used your data to figure that out or he just knew it internally because of their financial performance, it's certainly the corollary or what you're showing is definitely lining up with some of the actions CEOs and C-suite executives are taking today.
Yeah, I mean, just like we talk about digital, where we need data to do predictive analytics. I mean, companies like Schlumberger and others like Schlumberger have a lot of really bright analysts, right? And so they're very quick to draw these correlations. Oftentimes, though, the product lines are so close to the topic, James. I mean, when you're in the heat of the battle and you're serving customers, I mean, sometimes it's hard to be very objective, right?
Right.
And so it just helps to be able to benchmark and get as broad of an objectivity of the analysis as possible. But but even in U.S. land, I mean, Schlumberger exhibits some very strong strengths in information evaluation and G&G software, and there are certain technologies where even in U.S. land, Schlumberger excels. It's just there's a lot of the other ones they really struggle with, but
Sure.
Be it Halliburton, Baker Hughes, they have similar challenges, right?
Right. Well, so David, when you talk to say investment bankers like my counterpart on our advisory side at Evercore, what do they use your insights and data for?
Well, like on your side, I mean, you and your research team perform a lot of analytics on the financials that are provided by these oil field service companies, and when you correlate it to the voice of customer supplier performance, you oftentimes will see correlations between voice of customer loyalty ratings as measured by the net promoter score or their competitive position. So the investment bankers see a lot of investment corollaries, if you will, between the financial performance and their performance in the field to the voice of the customer. On the banking side, on the other side of your firm, oftentimes you're helping companies to try to come together that makes synergistic sense, right? And are trying to help them implement recovery plans or turnaround plans, if you will. And the data can be used to help identify logical technology partners and things of that nature to partner up with as part of that recovery plan.
Okay, great. So I know we touched briefly, but what are you seeing on the machine learning and AI side?
Yeah, that's an interesting one in the sense that when we interview geologists for that topic, or drilling engineers, or completion engineers, or production engineers, or even subsea engineers, the one common theme that we find on machine learning is very few people have actual hands-on real-life experience and haven't experienced the benefits of that yet, right?
Right.
But 80% of the companies, 75 to 80% of the companies will tell you that it's a key strategic intent. What we see going on behind the scenes is the oil companies are hiring data scientists, and they're writing these algorithms, integrating a lot of the data. I mean, being a geologist for Chevron and being stuck in this silo, every now and then we get to go talk to the drilling engineers, very rarely to the completion engineers, and I don't really remember talking too much to the production engineers. But when you're able to go through behind the scenes and you start to aggregate these data sets and start to run predictive analytics, looking for trends and outliers, um, you're really starting to behind the scenes connect the dots, even though the people may not yet be connecting the dots. Okay.
Sure.
Um, so that one of the things that we find in machine learning expectations. I mean, probably go to a couple of graphs here that deal with that topic. Probably right here, actually. Is like I said, very few people are highly familiar with it, but they have very high expectations of where it's going to add value. This happens to be feedback from the G&G community as it
Right.
relates to where they think machine learning could help. And I'll look at this graph and go processing and imaging, reservoir characterization, automated data management. But you can also kind of look at this and start to see, well, where is it they didn't see it? We see some of the subsea operators share success stories with us where they started monitoring, their subsea pumps on the seafloor, doing predictive analytics and monitoring. And, with some algorithms, they can start to predict out, how much life is left on this subsea pump, which really allows them to manage their maintenance cycles and getting, equipment in the supply chain to minimize downtime, right? We're seeing more and more autonomous AUV and technologies, some Oceaneering and Fugro and others,
Mm-hmm.
where, again, it ties into that remote operations where you can control it from a remote control center from Europe or from Houston and just reduce cost and improve efficiencies.
That's great. How do you, or how much variation, David, do you see in the results from year to year and the product line reports? And, are there certain companies that just consistently rank high?
We can see variability from year to year. Obviously, that's not a good thing. I mean, if you're an oil field service company, or even if you're an oil company, you want your oil field service companies and oil field service suppliers to show consistent performance from year to year, right? Unfortunately, we oftentimes do see variability in a particular supplier's performance. Oftentimes, it's due to maybe a change of leadership or something materially changed there. And in some cases, it could be they had a product quality issue where they were sourcing material from various suppliers and they had a QA/QC breakdown where they had to pull a bunch of pumps out of the hole, right?
Right.
We love looking. Well, I like seeing oil field service companies that show stable performance year on year, and have my roots grounded on the oil company side, working for Chevron from the 1980s to 2003. Being able to have an oil field service company that provides performance consistency from year to year is very comforting. Right?
Sure. And how do you guys, so I understand you do these, the process is you do live interviews with a large number of people, a large number of customers. How do you, I guess, how many analysts do you have involved in this process, and how do you incorporate all that feedback?
Sure. Well, to your point, we do spend about 20,000 hours a year talking and interviewing, experts and customers from around the world, and we'll ask them a series of open-ended questions. Like in this particular mud motor section, we'll ask them the open-ended question: what suppliers have you used? And how would you rate the performance of the suppliers on a scale of 1 to 10 on these 7 performance measures, including how likely would you be to recommend them to a friend or colleague to use in the future?
Right.
And so we're collecting, well, first thing you see is there's a high degree of variance between the top performing mud motor suppliers and the bottom performing mud motor suppliers, right? And so we aggregate this data together in order to generate many of those graphs that you were seeing earlier in the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So like in this particular mud motor section, you can start to see, international land, Schlumberger lives up to
Right.
their value proposition. However, when you move into North America land, you can see Schlumberger moved into an unfavorable position, but then you've got a lot of these other mid-tier suppliers that
Right.
are really demonstrating some of the best value. And so we're statistically gathering the data. We're picking up about 80,000 to 100,000 performance ratings each year. Our database has right now over 400,000 performance ratings that we can segment out, by region or major oil companies versus national oil companies, right? But we're basically a boutique research firm, James. We have about 15 to 20 professionals globally, and we just kind of stick to our knitting here.
So you and I were talking about this earlier before we started the webinar, and I know I have, of course, my views, but I'd love to hear your view here. What do you think the service industry is going to look like on the other side of this downturn?
Well, as I look across geology, geophysics, drilling, completion, production, and subsea, I just think naturally we're going to have consolidation, because I don't think the new market on the other end can support 60 different mud motor suppliers, 45 different seismic data processing suppliers, and 25 different gas lift suppliers, right?
Sure.
And in some cases, we're the victim of our own success. The oil field service companies have done a fabulous job over the last few years of driving efficiencies into the system that allow us to drill and complete wells more quickly and more productively year on year. So the industry as a whole is able to achieve more with less. And so, that's a compliment to the industry. But at the same time, we're every time we have these really gut-wrenching downturns in the market, which involves displacement of families and people, it keeps driving our industry to a higher level of efficiency.
Sure.
And so I clearly see fewer choices for the oil companies to choose from, as the oil field service companies are going to be returns focused and just simply not participate in certain product lines or certain geo markets where they feel like they're not going to be able to generate an adequate return for the shareholders. I also think, the oil companies, particularly the large ones that are in business for the long haul, are going to really need to step up their collaboration efforts with their oil field service companies as much as possible to strengthen the collaboration ties to help further drive these efficiencies in planning. Because as you start to have fewer and fewer suppliers to rely upon, you both have to be successful. Because I just believe as we move forward, the willingness to accept missteps and mishaps is going to continue to be less and less. Because as we get better and better, we continue to expect better and better, excellent performance, right?
Sure.
And
Fair enough.
the bar just keeps getting raised.
No doubt about that. I certainly agree very strongly with your view. I think that the other side of this is much more technology driven, and it's going to have to incorporate a lot more collaboration. We got to fix this industry and make it work again. Because I think oil shale kind of broke it for a little while there. So I think we need to get back to the roots and how the industry performed a decade ago, not how it performed over the last decade.
Sure. And I'm glad you weaved in the technology piece, because that's clearly evident. And I know we touched on it, but the acceleration towards digital, the acceleration towards remote operations and cloud, I think is going to stick and continue to grow. When we interview the oil and gas operators around the world, we consistently hear success stories, like in the production area. About 1 in 4 of the gas lift installations in U.S. land, James, were installing pressure temperature sensors to optimize gas lift optimization. So if you go back to 2015 and 16, where U.S. land operators began to explore the use of gas lift in lieu of rod lift and such, and they were thinking maybe they could run gas lift for a year or two. Well, now the operators are able to get 3, 4, 5 years on a run on gas lift as they learn how to optimize these systems. And so the more data they measure and analytically analyze and do the predictive analytics and the forward work, it just continues to drive improvements.
No doubt, no doubt about that. Well, we're getting close to the end of our hour here, and I know when you and my associate Andres connected a few weeks back, he asked you which companies were known for their technology prowess across certain product lines, and I know you provided him. He was blown away with some of the information you shared. I was hoping we could touch on that and wrap up what's called a mini lightning round, where I get your takes or we get your takes on why some companies are excelling in technology, if that's okay with you.
Sure, sure.
So let's start with drill bits and Altera.
Okay. Yeah. And when Andreas called me, some of these are technology driven and some are not just technology, but they're also service quality driven, right?
Sure.
So, if we take a quick look at drill bits right here, one of the things about Altera that stands out is, they clearly plot in a value advantage position. And when you look at Altera a little bit more closely, what we find is their customer loyalty ratings and their market share ratings continue to correlate to one another, and
Right.
they deliver better than industry average performance on service quality, availability. They're very quick to be able to provide the type of bit that the operator is looking for, and then on the
Right.
technology side, the bit performance is high. So they're able to really string it all together in U.S. land.
So what about fracturing and maybe we'll go back to the Liberty example.
Liberty is another one of those companies. I won't go back to their slide, but their performance is consistently better than industry average for completion efficiency and field service execution. And on top of that, they provide a high level of customer experience and responsiveness. And as I shared earlier, Liberty did a great job as they expanded beyond the Rockies in 17, 18, and 19. So many oil field service companies will kind of get over their skis a little bit too far and stumble, if
Yeah.
you know what I mean. You've been snow skiing before, and they didn't. And so I really, they really stand out for that.
Right. What about the ESP side and particularly Summit and the success Halliburton's had there?
Summit ESP is a great success story. Of course, Halliburton's purchased the company, of course, and you can see, in the United States land, they are ideally positioned as the premium-based supplier. And if you look more carefully at what Summit ESP has been able to do from 16 to 17 to 18 to 19, they defied that odds that we talked about earlier here, James, where you have to be the lowest price to win. Well, no, Summit ESP, now called Halliburton ESP, customer responsiveness, field service execution, technical support, availability, all outperforming. The reliability of the downhole pump, the ESP pump, really isn't materially better than the industry average performance in many cases. I mean, those ESPs are under attack with all the sand production and gas logging that takes place, right? And so, but if you take a look at their customer loyalty ratings as measured by the Net Promoter Score, the solid red line here, consistently better than the industry average line. And because of this superior customer loyalty, you see what happened to their market share. It continues to grow, even though they are exhibiting pricing leadership along the way. Classic example of you don't have to have the lowest price to win, but you better provide the best, field service execution, service quality that you can, and differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack, so that you do, even though you may cost more, you're worth it.
No doubt. Well, here's another one for you on the wellhead side. Cactus. We actually don't follow Cactus. We don't have research coverage on them, but I hear about them all the time, and I get asked about them all the time.
Yeah, Cactus. Scott and Joel Bender, they've done a fabulous job of positioning themselves. Because this is like what 3.0. It's just the third time they've done it now. But But when you look at their financials in terms of margins and such, you kind of scratch your head and go, "Oh my goodness, how are they making this happen?" Right? But they definitely have the formula for getting cost of goods and service quality up. And when you look at their performance year on year, I don't care if it's 16, 17, 18, or 19, they're consistently in this value advantaged quadrant.
Right.
And you can look their performance on the right-hand side, they're consistently outperforming not only on technology and operational advantages and speedhead technology and saving time and installation at the rig site. They've got the technology, they've got the field service, and they've got the customer focus. And the leadership over there is one to where they're extremely responsive to the customer needs, and very efficient in taking care of the customer. And because of that differentiating ability to perform, they've historically been offering differentiated financials relative to their peers.
Right.
To the positive.
Yep, sure, no doubt. Maybe if we broaden it a little bit and go to the artificial lift category and the success Apergy has had.
Yeah, one of the biggest changes in artificial lift in the unconventional market is instead of drilling and then completing a well, letting it flow for 6 months and putting it on rod lift, the first install is typically ESP or gas lift. And so since the operators use multiple forms of lift during the typical life cycle of a United States land well, we look at the top 4 artificial lift suppliers, Apergy, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, and Weatherford, because they're largely technology agnostic, James. They can offer multiple forms of lift. And amongst these big 4 players, Apergy does stand out with highest customer loyalty and delivering best overall value. I know with their pending coming together with Champion X, they'll have a unique capability to take a lot of the failures in U.S. land are due to chemical failures, and about 20 to 50% of these mechanical failures in rod lift and ESPs are attributed to deficiencies in production chemical programs. And so being able to influence the chemical part of it and the mechanical part of it, if they can successfully integrate that, will clearly give them an additional differentiating edge up in addition to the edge they already demonstrate.
Well, so last one for me, and then we'll let you go. On the drilling side, I'd love to see how H&P or maybe even Precision has been performing.
Our research there is not, we haven't really studied that too much in the most recent past, say last 12, 18 months. Okay. But in prior research, their customers always gave them really high marks for customer responsiveness and customer loyalty. And then, they're also fairly active with these drilling advisory systems. H&P has Motive, I believe it's called, James. I think.
Right. Motive.
In Precision Drilling, I forgot the name of theirs. But they really seem to be open towards being very customer focused. The ratings that we've received in the past have always been positive for those 2 drilling contractors. And they also seem to be really moving forward on pushing or implementing these newer technologies that we've talked about with drilling advisory systems. So.
Great. Well, David, this has been an excellent conversation. Tons that I've learned. I hope our audience, I'm sure our audience learned a lot as well. Thanks so much for joining me today. And we'll certainly check back in as this downturn progresses and see what's changed.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. I enjoyed being with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Take care.
Bye now.